Welcome to Schema Dark, a pulse engine like no other, featuring fully editable tempo-synced cinematic patterns from a wealth of sound design sources. Designed for the free contact player, Schema Dark explores the depths of what's possible using layers and loops, with a unique sequencer engine, alternate versions, macros, bespoke processing chains, and randomization for instant inspiration. Let's dive in. The concept of Schema Dark has 4 loops playing simultaneously on 4 independent tracks. Take a listen and keep your eye on the main section of the interface here. The 4 loops that Schema Dark is playing show across the top of the interface here and are colour-coded. You'll see these same colours in this futuristic 4x4 playback matrix. Each of the 16 circles represents one step in a sequence, and a step is lit up when played, with each circle split into quarters. With the next examples, watch for the colours of the quarter of each circle move through, indicating a slice of a loop playing from each of the 4 sound sources. The macro knobs across the bottom here transform the sound and flow in a number of ways. More on that in a bit. You can play the sounds over a range of 2 octaves, indicated by the blue key range here. These are presets with a more tonal feel, whereas another selection has less melodic content and a more atonal feel. Take a look at the loop slice playback in the matrix for this preset. Not all 16 steps are being played by all 4 tracks in bars 3 and 4. Take another look. There are some steps missing, some reversed playback, half-step playback, and other fun aspects that manipulate a loop far away from plain old repetitions. This is one of the key features of Schema Dark's playback engine. The playback order and number of steps per track and much more can be defined by you, either manually or with inspirational randomizer features. Let's recap. You have 4 audio loops on 4 tracks, and each loop is divided into 16 steps. These are slices of the same length. Still to come, I'll show how to use editing tools to define the order of each loop's 16 steps, cutoff, decay, volume and pitch, playback direction, and much more, plus manipulating macros to program elaborate tonal changes using simple controls. Schema Dark is as simple or as complex as you need it to be. For now, let's look at some of the more streamlined features, finding and selecting sounds. Each audio loop is 2 bars long, and there are hundreds in the following categories, available in the browser. Orchestral, real-life orchestral recordings of brass, strings and woodwinds with many different articulations. Drums, from acoustic to super edgy electronic analog and digital sources. Sound effects with suitably descriptive names. Drones, dark and moody ambiences. Basses, tonal content from super deep subs to clubby analog and digital bass loops. And finally the other category, sonic oddities such as 8-bit arcade loops, synth lines, warped pianos and much more. You might have seen the suffixes A, B, C and D for each of the named loops, because each loop has 4 different variations, so that's around 1700 loops in total. The A version of a loop is always the naked raw audio, for example how the orchestra brass section actually played in the room. B through D versions have been processed with a huge number of outboard gear, a massive modular system, many analog compressors, equalizers, tape machines and cassette recorders, vintage reverb devices, stomp boxes, and plenty of modern gear too. So versions B, C, and D are always heavily processed versions of the raw audio in version A. Handcrafted musical processing designed for each individual loop. Take a listen. As you've seen, each 2-bar loop has been sliced into 16 parts, and these can be played back in any order. Multiply 1700 different loops by the 16 steps per loop, and you get over 27,000 individual slices that can be mixed in any combination. That's why Schema Dark is such a flexible and inspiring tool. The sonic difference can be huge between a whole loop playing back over 2 bars and slices being rearranged. Let's go into editing mode and solo track 1, switching playback direction to forward. Then change the loop to a bass. Currently the loop is playing slices in order. You can see that in the center matrix: A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on. Clicking the pencil icon gets us into edit mode, where we can click slices across the bottom here to preview them. Change loop length to 4 and we get a very different result in the playback. Let's explore this page in more detail. As we know, the 4x4 matrix in the centre of the main page gives us a quick visual reference for the 16 steps being played and their order. The 4 coloured quarters of each circle show when each of the 4 tracks is being triggered. I'll open the layer edit page for track 1, the strings, and solo just this track. You can hear there's a short break in the playback. This is at the positions of the grey circles which mute the playback. Simply click the circles to turn any of the 16 pattern playback positions on or off. Presets are on the left-hand side of the interface, the fastest way to change pattern playback. You can also randomize which slices are on and off by clicking this dice icon. There are 3 different slots to store your pattern just here, so just click on a slot, select a preset pattern, or edit your own pattern, and you have it assigned to that slot. Whilst you're playing, recall the slots via the purple key switches here. With the dice in the centre, you can randomise the positions of the slices. Which slice of the loop plays in which position. And of course, as I showed briefly before, you can select the positions manually. Just click on the pencil icon, choose a position, and preview the slices here whilst assigning. On the left you can define the overall pattern length, useful for repetitions or polyrhythmic programming. On the right you can define various playback parameters. Try double or half speed playback. Skip or play muted steps. Define the playback direction, either forward, backward, or ping-pong. With sample direction you can reverse the samples. With these 2 knobs you can dial in the amount of send effects that you define on this effects page. Currently algorithmic reverb and psych delay are selected, but these are easily changed with the drop-downs. Many unique impulse responses have been designed exclusively for this instrument, and they're available under the convolution reverb option. Just choose them here. A quick tip: once you've found a combination of playback parameters and effects that you like, you can easily audition new sounds and your settings will be retained. Just open the browser and pick some new sounds, or keep your layer editing settings open and use the left and right arrows here to browse. Let's take a look at a few important controls across the bottom of the interface. Firstly, this layer fader. By default, this is linked to the mod wheel of your hardware controller and moves from just playing track 1 at the lowest position to slowly introducing the other 3 tracks as the fader is pushed up. A brilliant way to keep your sounds moving and create tension. Now about the dials from left to right. These are macros tied to specific settings in the layer edit page. For example, filters, which is not just a simple global cutoff for all tracks. Let's switch to the edit view of track 1 and solo it to demonstrate. Here you see on the cutoff tab that you can define modulation amounts for every single step individually. That's a lot of flexibility. For example, this track uses a low pass filter, shown here, and you turn the filters macro from left to right to open the filter. Now looking at the second track, you'll see there is a high pass filter running, and the sonic result when turning the filters macro is completely different to track 1. A final look at track 4 shows that this low pass filter has negative modulation when moving the filters macro from left to right. Some filters also have an option for resonance. Each preset has unique filter macro programming. The tails macro allows modulation of the step tail, essentially the decay time of each step. The more the macro is dialed in, the shorter the decay for most of the steps will be. To be specific, let's open and solo track 1 and look at the decay tab. Here you see the negative modulation settings for each track, meaning shorter decays when turning the tails macro clockwise. The gates macro enables you to gate single steps, attenuating the volume when a step's macro setting allows it. Have a listen. Looking again at track 1, the volume tab shows the macro settings that apply to the gates macro dial. In the 16 circles you can see that only every other dial has macro programming. And in this case, that means you'll always hear positions 1, 3, 5 and so on play, regardless of the gate's macro dial. Positions 2, 4, 6 and so on will be affected. Take a listen. The tunings macro allows pitching of single steps individually, and in the factory library this macro is mainly used for percussive atonal tracks. The remaining 2 macros are global effect amount controls and allow you to dial down both effect sends quickly. Without too much fanfare, I just want to touch on a couple of other things that are worth knowing. For a full explanation of all features and functions, do check out the Schema Dark online and PDF manuals. This mixer page is where you can adjust the mix between the 4 tracks, channel on and off buttons, volume and panning for each track, and a channel selector for multi-output contact instances. We've already looked at the browser for loading sounds, but on the right-hand side you can load settings for each sound layer in simple and complex categories. Finally, this page shows an explanation of the key mapping, including choosing the 4 sound layers, 3 pattern slots, and playback modes for forward, backwards, and ping-pong. As you can see, from the huge selection of loops and variations to the comprehensive editing and macro options, Schema Dark is a treasure trove of cinematic sequences and tension pulses. For more information, check the product page at nativeinstruments.com, and thanks for watching.